Hey students, this is Mr. Eckert, and we're going to go through Target H8, which says that you should be able to explain the inheritance in terms of complete dominance, incomplete dominance, codominance, and sex-linked traits. And of course, really what it means by explain the inheritance, as well as being able to explain how these different forms of inheritance work, you should also be able to perform Punnett squares that show that you know how they work. So first, complete dominance is what you learned if you had any kind of heredity or genetics in middle school and learned how to do Punnett square. So it is also called simple dominance. And you may remember that in complete dominance there's three possible genotypes. There's two different alleles that code for different traits and or different forms of a gene. And then you have a homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive are the three possible genotypes. In complete or simple dominance, there's only two possible phenotypes, either the dominant phenotype or the recessive phenotype. Now remember, phenotype is what the organism looks like, whereas genotype describes the letters or the alleles that are used to symbolize those forms of that trait. So both the homozygous dominant and heterozygous genotypes would show the dominant phenotype, while the only genotype that would show the recessive phenotype would be a homozygous recessive. Now you'll see that here on this next screen. If we use a capital R to symbolize a red flower and a lowercase r to symbolize a yellow flower, you can see that the top two examples, which is a homozygous dominant at the top and heterozygous in the middle, both show the dominant phenotype of red, whereas the only one that shows yellow is the homozygous recessive at the bottom. Now, incomplete dominance works a little differently. There isn't really a completely dominant allele. Excuse me. So one allele doesn't really mask the effect of the other allele. So as a result, if you have a heterozygous individual, it actually shows a blend of the two alleles. So you still have three genotypes, homozygous dominant. Now, homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive don't really apply in the same way for these, but when we say homozygous dominant, we just mean two alleles of the same. Heterozygous, two different alleles, and homozygous recessive, two different alleles, that they're both the same. Now there's three different phenotypes though: the dominant phenotype, the recessive phenotype, and a blend of both. We're going to use two capital letters that are both different letters to represent incomplete dominance. So you'll see that in this next example. If capital R is a red flower color, capital W is a white flower color, then capital R genotype would be a red flower. Capital W would be a white flower. But you'll see in a heterozygous individual, big R, big W, that would be a pink. So notice it's not red or white, but a blend of those two phenotypes. Codominance works a little bit differently. Co means with or together. So in this type of inheritance pattern, both alleles are dominant, meaning they both are expressed equally. They don't blend together. You still have three genotypes: homozygous dominant, or two alleles of the same, of the one kind, the heterozygous and homozygous recessive, two alleles of the other kind. But again, there's three different phenotypes: the dominant, the recessive, and then the heterozygous genotype that produces both alleles expressing themselves. We'll call that dominant and recessive. So again, we're going to use two different letters. We're going to keep them both capital. You'll see how this works with this example in cows. We'll let big R symbolize a red color in cows, big W a white color in cows. So a big R would be a red cow, as you see on the left at the top. Big W would be the white cow, as you see on the right at the top. But now a heterozygous individual, big R, big W, would be something called roan. And notice this is a cow that has both red hair and white hair. It's not a blend of the two that's an intermediate color. It's actually both colors are being expressed simultaneously. So that's the difference. Sex-linked traits are traits that are found on the sex chromosomes. You'll remember that normal humans have 46 chromosomes, and only 2 out of those 46 code for the sex of the individual. All the other 44, which are known as autosomes, carry most of an individual's traits, but there are a few traits that are found on the sex chromosomes. So they're called sex-linked traits. You may remember from doing a karyotype that the X chromosomes are physically larger than the Y chromosome. And remember, chromosomes are made of DNA, so that means the X chromosomes have more DNA. If they have more DNA, there's just simply more space physically to have more traits. So that's why typically most sex-linked traits are X-linked, found on the X chromosome. There are a few that are on the Y chromosome, but most of them are on the X. So in the class, we're going to focus on those X-linked traits. Now, when you write a sex-linked trait, we're still going to use capital and lowercase letters because most of these traits are either dominant or recessive, have dominant and recessive alleles. But we have to remember to physically write those letters on the sex chromosomes. Again, we're going to look primarily at X-linked traits, so you physically write them on the X chromosome. Notice at the bottom in this example, color blindness, which is a recessive X-linked trait, we're going to symbolize it with a lowercase c, you can see on the bottom right, and so that would be colorblind. An uppercase c on the bottom left, that would be normal vision. Males have an X and a Y chromosome. Remember, that designates a male. So there's only 2 possible genotypes. Can you think of what they might be? Again, we're only putting that letter on the X and not on the Y. So you could have X big CY or X little cy. The X big CY would be a normal vision male, and the X little cy would be a colorblind male. Females, again, are XX, so there's 3 possible genotypes. Can you see what those might be? They would be X big C, X big C, X big C, X little c, and X little c, X little c. You can see in the last individual, that would be a colorblind female, whereas the first 2 would both have normal vision. That middle one, X big C, X little c, would be a carrier. It says, again, men normally have an X and a Y, while women have 2 X's. So men are the only ones to inherit Y chromosomes. Therefore, those few traits that are Y-linked traits obviously only appear in men. But both men and women can both get X-linked traits since they both have an X chromosome. It says there's about 1,000 different human X-linked sex-linked traits. And the examples that we'll look at in class are color blindness, hemophilia, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So color blindness affects about 1 in 12 men. It can be partial or complete, and it again is an X-linked recessive trait. Normally this is diagnosed by giving an individual a test that you see here. You can see different numbers that appear in these diagrams, and if you can see the numbers, then you probably don't have color blindness. But if you have any difficulty reading any of these numbers, then you may have a partial color blindness. So you probably should be checked out by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist if you have trouble seeing any of the numbers in these 6 diagrams. Hemophilia is a disease of the blood. There's actually 2 types of it, but in both types, the blood doesn't clot properly. So when a person gets cut, they can actually bleed out because their blood is not clotting. It says there's about 20,000 hemophilia patients in the U.S. About 85% of these are type A. Now again, in the United States, when somebody has hemophilia, they can give them drugs now that will make their blood clot. So it generally is, as long as they're taking their medicine, it's not an issue. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a disease of the muscles, of course, and it's a progressive disease, so it gets worse as it goes on. It causes muscle weakness, and eventually it will affect the whole body. So it says symptoms usually appear before age 6 and may appear as early as small babies. Usually by the time the individual is 10 years old, they need some kind of braces on their legs to help them walk, and usually by the time they reach puberty or shortly before, they the leg muscles are so weakened they need to be in a wheelchair. And you can see this occurs in about 2 out of every 10,000 people. So usually this is not a curable disease, so they can treat the symptoms only. Again, it's progressive though, so the treatments become less and less effective as time goes on. Exercise definitely helps strengthen those muscles along with physical therapy. And again, we talked about how braces and wheelchairs may help the person get around a little better and be more mobile as time goes on. And then here's some diagrams that show individuals that have muscular dystrophy, and a diagram showing the major muscles that are affected by this disease. You may remember Jerry Lewis had a Labor Day telethon to raise money to research possible cures for muscular dystrophy every year. So that finishes out that target. If you have any questions, please let me know either in class or sign up for a time where I can give you some help.